Northampton men fought for our country's independence in one of the 15 most significant battles in world history. That's at Bemis Heights, the Second Battle of Saratoga. The British commander was John Burgoyne, nicknamed Gentleman Johnny. The American commanders were General Philip Schuyler, later of the Northern Department, later replaced by Horatio Gates. John Stark was the leader of the New Hampshire militia. Burgoyne was an ambitious man, and he wanted his own command. He bet his friends 10 pounds that he could end the rebellion in the colonies within a year. He proposed a three-prong offensive. He would come down from Canada, and St. Leger would come east from Lake Ontario, and William Howe would come north with supplies and the primary British force from the already occupied New York City up to Albany. And when they were successful in taking Albany, they would separate New England, the birthplace of the American Revolution, from the rest of the colonies, and the fight for independence would be doomed. Burgoyne left St. John, Canada, leading almost 10,000 men, 4,500 redcoats, which was the most powerful army in the world, and 4,700 German mercenaries from Brunswick and Hesse, and 600 Canadians and Indians and Tories. Tories were the Americans that remained loyal to the king. They seemed unstoppable when they took 3 forts in 3 days. Fort Ticonderoga was an immense fort. It required about 10,000 men to protect her. The Americans only numbered 3,000. On July 6th, Burgoyne's fleet approached with 3 large ships, 20 gunboats, and 120 flat-bottom transports. Nevertheless, the Americans were prepared to stand their ground, outnumbered more than 3 to 1. But when Burgoyne hauled many of his 138 cannon up a mountainside to hail down on Fort Ticonderoga, it was decided that they would have to abandon the fort and slip away in the darkness of night. But a fire broke out at Fort Ticonderoga, lighting the sky and exposing their escape. So the chase was on. Northampton's own Timothy Dalton was killed at this time. Simon Fraser, a very famous commander of the British infantry, followed half of the soldiers that had escaped by land to Hubbardton and took Hubbardton the very next day with 200 prisoners. The other half of our army that was at Ticonderoga went by sea, down Lake George to Fort Anne. And the next day they were, the Fort Anne had to fall. And that's when the British reported finding a flag that had 13 red and white stripes with a constellation. At this pace, Burgoyne would be in Albany before American troops could organize a strong defense. Schuyler, the American commander at the time, had to slow Burgoyne down, and he knew that traveling south on the Hudson, that Burgoyne would reach rapids and waterfalls and would have to go by land on the east side of the river. So he sent his men to fell trees into a labyrinth and burn bridges and destroy crops and scatter livestock for 20 miles north of Fort Edwards. A spy who probably pretended to be a Tory by placing a piece of white paper in his hat like a cockade, learned that Burgoyne was approaching and told Schuyler. Schuyler was unable to defend Fort Edward. It had been dismantled before the war. So he sent his men south of Saratoga to Bemis Heights, where the land rose 300 feet above the Hudson and was ideal location to bring battle against Burgoyne to try to stop as the last stopping point before they could reach Albany and the job be done. Burgoyne's Indian scouts, mostly braves, trying to prove their manhood, had been murdering and scalping men and women and children, Tories and rebels alike, in hopes of discouraging militia enlistment. But these acts of terror caused men to enlist, not only to fight for liberty, but to also protect their families. John Stark raised about 1,500 men in New Hampshire. His reputation